Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here. I'm going to go over Chapter 4, which is all about knowledge, evidence, and errors in critical thinking. All right. So we start off with what knowledge is, right? And it probably seems like a pretty easy answer. Knowledge is just the information or experience that we believe is true. We believe it's true because we have justification or evidence to support that it is true. But understanding how knowledge is acquired, as well as the limitations of human understanding, is pretty important for logical reasoning and critical thinking, because there are a lot of limitations to the human brain and what we are capable of perceiving and understanding. And we're all sort of prone to certain types of errors in thinking that don't really, it's not just about our biases and our cultural norms or things like that. Those things certainly play a part in critical thinking. But these are more, it's more internal, what I'm talking about, more literally what happens in our brain as we acquire knowledge and process that knowledge, interpret that knowledge, and the types of errors that can occur throughout that whole process. And that's why we're all prone to them, because it's not external factors per se. It's literally the function of our brain. All right. So first thing to talk about is, again, how we acquire knowledge. There's two main camps where people sort of fall in terms of how we acquire knowledge. The rationalists, like Plato, right, ancient Greece, they claim that most human knowledge and truth are derived from reason, right? Reasoning through premises, building to form a conclusion, supporting the premises, supporting the conclusion, right? Logic, but it's all in the reasoning. Empiricists, though, they think that we arrive at truth and knowledge through empirical evidence collected by our physical senses, right? What we physically experience, that is what we use to determine truth and reality. But then this German guy, Kant, comes along and he's like, I think you're both kind of wrong. Really, it's not reasoning or empirical evidence, but it's the structure of our minds that determines reality. Because we do not see reality as it is, but rather as our brain interprets it by structuring and processing incoming information. We do not have the ability to directly record what we experience. Our brain is constantly processing it and interpreting it. So if we can each interpret things differently, then there is no set reality. Or at the very least, we cannot rely on our senses and reasoning to tell us what that reality is. Because it's all perception. We create our own reality. String theory, this is sort of an example of how this could be true. String theory claims that there are 9 spatial dimensions, but our brains are only structured to perceive a 3-dimensional world. There's like 6 other spatial dimensions existing around us that our brains literally can't perceive. We can't. I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, so I won't claim to have an informed opinion on that idea, that theory, but it's interesting for sure. 6 spatial dimensions that are existing around us right now. and our brain just can't. We just can't. What's going on in those facial movements? What do they look like? What is happening in them? It's intriguing. But, you know, even taking it down from that theoretical level, the structure of our brain makes us prone to perceptual and cognitive errors that happen on a daily basis. So it's not just this, you know, oh, we create our own realities, you know, and it's all out there in this theoretical weird place that, you know, only a handful of experts can really understand. This is our brain definitely has structural things in place, and because of that, we are all prone to perceptual and cognitive errors. Right? So, first thing, we're taking in information to form our opinions, our worldview, our points of view on issues, making choices, making decisions in our everyday lives. How do we do that? We collect evidence in some way, and we reason through that evidence. So the first thing that we have to think about is how our brains allow us to evaluate evidence, right? Because the evidence is something that will either prove or disprove a particular view, right? It can come from a variety of sources, and especially in our culture today, we are inundated with evidence, information overload. So as good critical thinkers, we have to evaluate all evidence before we use it in critical analysis. We have to learn how to evaluate the credibility and accuracy of evidence. And that is something that our culture is sorely lacking. The information age has made it way too easy to not evaluate the credibility and accuracy of evidence. So we're going to talk about direct experience and false memories, right? So, as we stated, our brains take in, organize, and interpret sensory experience. It does not directly record sensory experience, right? So, we rely on direct sense experience, but it's not infallible. And that's something that we fail to really take into account sometimes. You know, I mean, it's not to say that, you know, direct experience is always wrong. It's just that you cannot assume that it's always right. And memories are subject to influence. Memories can be affected greatly by time, language, and external suggestions. All right, so time. The more time that passes, the more our memories can become distorted. And I think that we all understand that to a certain extent. You know, there are certainly moments of like my childhood that I used to have very vivid memories of, but now I only have faint memories of. That's just the human experience, right? But it is something to always keep in mind is that, you know, a person may not be lying about what they remember, but the passage of time might make it so that they aren't fully recalling or accurately recalling what they remember. Also, with the passage of time comes more knowledge, more information, and we can allow that information to distort our memory of a moment. The example used here was with the 1986 Challenger explosion, right? And it's, you know, if you're of my generation, in 1986, if you were of school age or older, you probably have a memory of this event because first time a teacher was going up into space, they televised it. Kids, I know in America, especially all over, sitting in classrooms watching the live coverage of the Challenger space shuttle, the launch. And we know that disaster struck, right? So the day after that happened, there's a group of college students who were asked to write down their experience of watching that disaster unfold. So one day after, they write everything that they can remember, everything they felt, everything they saw, everything they experienced. Right? So 18 months later, year and a half later, they were asked again to write about their experience of that Challenger takeoff. What they wrote on that day 18 months later was quite different than what they wrote just the day after it happened, yet they all were confident that their memory of the moment was still totally accurate. But they had included a lot of things in their new memory of the moment. Things like that, that they remember seeing the big explosion. There was no big explosion, not in a traditional sense, right? They remember that the entire crew died at the 73-second mark. Well, first of all, we didn't know that when it happened. As we were watching it, the actual memory that they're supposed to be recalling, and it wasn't true. They included in their memory how there were environmental bans on some of the products and machinery involved, and that they never should have been used, but there was political pressures to go ahead and launch the shuttle on time. And none of that was really true either. But more importantly, they didn't know that when they watched it. They're supposed to be recalling their memory, what they experienced. And none of that information would have been available or known, even if it was true. None of it would have been available or known in the moment. So the passage of time and acquiring new information has altered their memory of that event. And you can see how that's so normal to do. It would be really hard to go back and try to recall the events and not let new information kind of filter into that memory. But it's not that's not the actual memory. So you guys see how it can be tricky dealing with direct experience, the passage of time, and memories, right? We also have language. Language is so powerful. Language shapes us, right? Language is such an integral part of who we become, how we view ourselves, how we view others, how we view the world. It is so influenced by the language we use. And I don't mean the language we speak, the word choices, the language we use. So here's a group of students who were shown a video of a car accident. And then afterwards, they were split into 4 different groups, 4 smaller groups, and each smaller group was asked a question about the speed of the cars. Except the language used in each of the 4 questions was a little different. And you can see how the results varied. Right? So they were asked about the speed that the cars were going. And the answer they gave, the average answer, varies depending on the language used in the question. So, for instance, with the group that was asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed each other, 41 miles an hour. Second group, how fast were the cars going when they collided, right? So collided, still pretty significant, but not quite as intense as smash, right? This still got 40 miles an hour. How fast were the cars going when they bumped each other? So just a little bump. That was 38 miles an hour. And then how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other? Contacted. It could be anything, right? Just the slightest little touch. That's contact. 32 miles an hour. So from the most extreme language to the least extreme language, there is a 9-mile-an-hour difference. And that can be significant. And the only reason that they gave different answers was because of the description of the accident in the question. They all watched the same video, but they all gave different answers depending on how the question was phrased, the language used in the question, right? So when you're getting eyewitness accounts, when you are, you have to take into consideration whether or not the language being used in conversation is altering that eyewitness perspective, right? Because this could have been a real accident, and these students could have been real eyewitnesses to this accident. And if if a police officer is asking them, how fast were the cars going when they smashed each other, they're going to get a higher rate of speed. Or how fast was car A going when it smashed into car B? And they give this answer that is perhaps significantly higher than the true rate of speed. Because then you ask another eyewitness, how fast was car A going when it contacted car B? And you get 32 miles an hour. It's significant, the eyewitness testimony can change. The answers can change based on the language being used. Yeah, that's important to know. Very important to keep in mind. External suggestions can also affect our memories. This is literally false memory, like implanting false memories into someone's brain. Like, I really want like a visual of like a literal representation of implanting a false memory into someone's brain. But it's really just through the power of suggestion, right? So psychologists have found that when you take a person and you tell them a story that is allegedly true about them, creating like a childhood memory. Let's say, for instance, getting lost at the mall. That never happened to the person. But the psychologist can tell the patient it did happen. And give details, perhaps. Maybe not even give details, just say that it happened. All it takes is 3 sessions, and that patient then believes that that's a real memory. Well, 25%. And they will even provide details. It's like 3 times is all it takes to convince them that this actually happened. But then they go a step further and they actually create the story with the details and everything. And they believe it. They now believe that they got lost in the mall when they were a child. And they have all the details to prove it. Right? Now, this was research, right? I'm not trying to say that psychologists implant, false memories into their patients' minds. Just to point out that, this research done by psychologists shows that it is absolutely possible, and that it might not even take as much time or effort as you would assume. That it's really not that difficult to convince someone that something they've never experienced actually happened to them. We also need to be very aware of hearsay and anecdotal evidence. Hearsay is like the game of telephone, where, person A starts off and it goes down the line. They share a message, they whisper something to person B, who then whispers it to person C, and on down the line we go. And by the time we get to person Z, the message is not even close to what it was originally. The idea being that the further down the line it travels, the more distorted, altered, and completely changed it becomes. So hearsay is just hearing information that has come down a line of people in some way. Like, so-and-so heard from so-and-so who heard from so-and-so that this happened. Or so-and-so heard from so-and-so who heard from so-and-so that research has shown that this is true. You're like, well, I know the game of telephone, and I'm not trusting. It's not like I'm not trusting any individual person. I'm not trying to call anybody else. It's just, I know what happens. It's not malicious necessarily. It's not intentional necessarily. Like when we're playing the game of telephone, we're not. And maybe you do have those people out there who are intentionally trying to mess up the message and turn it into something funny or something, naughty or rude or whatever. But I think when we're really little kids playing the game of telephone, we're not trying to mess it up. We're just not really good at repeating what we just heard. So, I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm definitely going to double check that information because chances are something has been altered or changed about it. That's why hearsay is not allowed in a court of law, right? Even when it's only one person removed, you still can't use it because even going from person A to person B to person C, right? Person A is either the victim or the defendant, right? And they said something to person A or person B, I'm sorry. Person B can't get up on the stand and, well, depending on who it is, sometimes it's allowed, but certainly person C can't. Even if they got it right, even if what person C heard is exactly what person A said, they still can't get up on the stand because there's just too much of a risk that things have been altered or that people interpret meaning, and so we can't rely on hearsay to really accurately provide facts and information. Anecdotal evidence can't be either. Anecdotal evidence isn't eyewitness testimony. This isn't someone who has been there and experienced it directly. This is someone who is there just telling their story or providing their view of something. And, we've already learned that time can alter our memory. Language can alter our memory. External suggestions can alter our memory. And then we have this added, problem where when we are talking about ourselves, something that we're involved in, we have a tendency to exaggerate and distort. We want to make ourselves look as good as possible, and we want to do whatever we can to minimize the risk of looking bad in whatever way. So it's just anecdotal evidence has to be really critically analyzed as well. Right? So if a court of law really shouldn't, and we do give credence to eyewitness testimony. I don't know why we do, but we do. Because clearly it's actually not a very reliable source of truthful information, accurate information. Truthful makes it seem like we're lying. They're not lying. They're just inaccurate. Right? So eyewitness testimony is not that good. Our memories can be altered for various reasons. Hearsay is not allowed. Anecdotal evidence is suspect. Who can we put up on a stand? Who can we trust? Well, experts get put up on the stand, right? Definitely. But it is always important to examine credentials before accepting any expert's point of view. 4 factors that you can use to determine someone's expertise. First of all, what is their education and training, and does it come from a reputable source, right? Do they have experience making judgments in this field already? Now, that's not to say that a person who's only been in this field for a year or two, I don't really know how you can be considered an expert in only a year or two. Or someone who is an expert and has just never come across the opportunity to publish any kind of judgment or to vocalize anything. That doesn't automatically mean that they can't be trusted or that they're not credible. but it's just something to look for to ensure that someone is credible. Like, do they have experience making judgments in this field? Do they have a reputation among their peers in the field? And what is that reputation? And why do they have that reputation? What are their accomplishments in that field? Publications, awards, whatever the case may be. Looking for those things can help you determine whether or not it's reasonable to accept an expert's point of view, right? But expert testimony is not foolproof either. All right, so experts can disagree, right? If experts are disagreeing, then we kind of have to reserve judgment, right? Maybe look to others in the field, right? So like you got two experts up on the stand, they're totally disagreeing. Maybe we need to widen the search, right? Experts can also have preconceived ideas. They can be influenced in terms of how they interpret evidence. They're human too, right? Experts can be biased. They can misinterpret data, for sure. But we definitely want to pay attention to the experts who are always going against the grain, who are always or often, in conflict with other experts' analysis. Sometimes you have the I don't want to say whistleblower, but you have the person who comes in with a new perspective or makes a new discovery and says, I think it's this. And all the other experts in their field are like, you're nuts. Sit down. And as more time passes, they come to realize that the person may have actually been right. It takes a lot of courage to be that person to stand up and go against what all of your peers and colleagues are saying. At the same time, it does need to be looked at closely when you have one person saying something and a whole group of other experts saying something completely different. It bears closer inspection. Right? So when we are looking at evidence, however it is we're gathering, our analysis of that evidence needs to be accurate, it needs to be unbiased, and as complete as possible. Credible evidence is usually going to be consistent with other relevant evidence. The more evidence there is, the more reasonable it is to accept it. And it's okay if you realize that the majority of the evidence supports a claim that you opposed. It's okay to change your mind, right? If you're changing your mind because you have done the research and you have learned new things and you have considered alternative ideas and you've been open to what others have to say, that's growth, that's learning, that's evolving. There is no virtue in rigid adherence to a position that is not supported by evidence, right? Stand firm in your beliefs once you have them, but make sure that they're supported by credible evidence. That's all. But keeping in mind all of those things about knowledge and perceptual errors and errors with memory and even issues with experts in their fields, like you do have to keep all that in mind, but stand firm in your beliefs as long as it's supported by credible evidence, making sure that you have actually evaluated it. Sometimes we don't have access to credible evidence. Something's new. Something is We literally just don't have access to it. And if we're dealing with things in real life, we don't always have knowledge ahead of time. But you can look for contradictory evidence, right? So basically, when there's enough evidence to contradict an idea, then we have good reason to doubt that idea. Even if we can't find any, especially if we can't find any information that supports that idea, but all this information that contradicts it, it's reasonable to believe then all of the contradictory evidence. If there's no credible supporting evidence and no credible contradictory evidence, then we have to remain open. We have to remain open. We may not be able to form a solid point of view yet. We also need to watch out for confirmation bias when we're looking at evidence, and experts. And remember, confirmation bias is when we have a point of view on something, or we have an opinion, and when we go to research it, we're only looking for research that supports the point of view we already have. We don't even bother to look for information that might contradict our point of view or that might prove us wrong. And if we happen to come across information that would prove us wrong, we find a way to disregard it or discredit it, right? Confirmation bias, only looking for evidence that supports the point of view we already have, right? Got to avoid that. You also want to remember our method of doubt and method of belief, right? So we need to develop strategies that allow us to examine evidence that confirm our point of view. We need to learn how to evaluate those from a position of skepticism. Like, I believe this is true. Here's all the evidence that says this is true. Now let me play devil's advocate and evaluate that evidence, right? Skeptically. Here's all the evidence that goes against my point of view. I'm going to go into that with a method of belief. Even though I know it totally contradicts what I think, I'm going to evaluate all of this evidence as if it could be true, as if it could be right, and I'm wrong. The only real way to get to anything that resembles truth is being able to look at evidence that supports what you think and say, what if all this is wrong? I need to allow for the possibility that all of this is wrong. And then I'm looking at all the stuff that completely goes against my point of view and say, what if all of this is right? I have to do that for both sides. And that will allow me to be open enough to all the information I'm taking in and to analyze it appropriately and piece together what I think is actually the case. All right. When it comes to gathering evidence, obviously you want to make sure you're using good resources, right? Especially today. Expert interviews are a good way to go, keeping in mind all of the things we just said about expert testimony, right? Dictionaries, encyclopedias, library catalogs, scholarly journals because they're peer-reviewed, government documents, websites with a .gov top-level domain. Those are usually credible. Websites with a .edu domain. That's a school education related, so that's usually credible. .org is usually some sort of organization, nonprofit organization. Those tend to be credible, but as always, even with .gov and .edu, you still have to check for biases, right? Or if they are being influenced in any way. It's a good way to follow the money. Or follow the sponsorship, follow the affiliations, right? .com, we know anybody can have a .com. Some really great stuff out there with .com domains, but just a lot of garbage also. Those are the ones that are much harder to distinguish. Again, just use the same set of, steps that you take for, looking at your expert testimony as well. Like, who are these people? Like, how do they know what they know? Where does their knowledge come from? Where does their experience come from? Is it valid? Is it credible? Um, what do other people say about them? Are they published in anything? Even people, you don't have to be like a scientist or whatever to be published on something. All right. So be aware of where you're getting your information and go to the right places to begin with. Take accurate notes, keep track of your sources. Even if you're just posting stuff on social media, cite your sources, right? And if you've taken something word for word, put it in quotes. Even though it's not an essay and you don't have to use APA format, just be ethical with the information that you are sharing with other people, right? All right, let's talk about cognitive and perceptual errors in thinking, because this is, I think, where it gets even more interesting. Right, so we have this radio broadcast, War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Classic, right? So when War of the Worlds was first broadcast on the radio, broadcast to the nation, a lot of listeners fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And not that they was trying wasn't trying to manipulate people or to trick people. It was just a story, the radio program. Yeah, people just, they thought it was really happening. They thought it was real. They were using their five senses, empirical evidence, right? The thing that with which we create our reality and gather knowledge and get to the truth, our five senses. They were using their five senses when they smelled the poisonous Martian gas, when they felt the heat rays, when they saw the giant machines in New Jersey, when they heard the president's voice on the radio ordering everyone to evacuate. They were using their senses, their sensory experience, and it was all telling them that this was real. How? How could that happen? How could a radio program have listeners convinced that they were experiencing these events? Well, maybe we'll get some idea of how it happened, why it happened, as we go through some of these perceptual and cognitive errors here. Right? Most people underestimate the critical role that cognitive and social factors play in our interpretation of sensory data. Emotion is often blamed for errors in our interpretation. Going back to the World of Worlds thing, like historically, we would blame people's emotional state on those errors. I smelled the poisonous gas. You're letting your emotions get the best of you. You were in this emotional state before you heard the program, and that's why it led, like emotions. We blamed it on emotions. But studies actually suggest that a lot of our errors in thinking are neurological in nature. They are either cognitive or perceptual errors for the most part. Perceptual errors. So again, we sort of create our own reality, right? Our brains, our minds are not like blank sheets of paper. We are not cameras. We are not video recorders. Our brain is like an artist. It takes in what it is experiencing and sort of constructs a picture of the world. While it's doing that, our brain filters our perception, and it will also fill in missing information based on our expectations. That could explain, that could be one reason why the whole reaction to the World of Worlds happened, right? But our brains aren't infallible. Like, we're not transcribing reality exactly as it exists. We're transcribing reality as we interpret it. And each person is going to be different, right? One type of perceptual error, and again, this is not something that's going to seem like a big deal at first, but it can be. Let's look at the St. Louis Arch. Like this creation here is constructed intentionally so that the distance here at the base, the width of the base, is the exact same distance as the height from ground to the middle of the arch. Both ways, 630 feet. 630 feet here, 630 feet here, right? But it doesn't look like that. It looks way taller than it does wide. And yet, even though we know that it's 630 feet both ways, even if we went there and measured it ourselves somehow and saw, yep, 630, yep, 630, our brain would still tell us that it is taller than it is wide. It is an optical illusion, and our brains are literally, optical illusions are like one of our kryptonites. Like our brains cannot handle it. So we have difficulty estimating the height of things. It's a perceptual error. And so, again, people giving descriptions, or even just ourselves trying to interpret what we see. We tell ourselves this is the reality. Our brain perceives it, our brain interprets it, and then that's what we believe. But it's not true. It's not. Our brain has messed up. It has made a mistake. So if it's made, and we don't know it's made a mistake, even when we're told, nope, it still looks taller. So you have to keep in mind that there are, especially with our sensory experience, our brain doesn't always get it right. Our brain can make mistakes, and it often does. We also are prone to misperception of random data. Our brains hate the absence of meaning. We want order. We want meaning. We like patterns. We want to know that everything has a reason. There's a meaning behind things. There's an explanation. Oh my gosh, we want explanation. And our brain often can't handle it when we're not given the meaning or the order or the explanation. So we will create it. That's why when we look up at the clouds, sometimes, you can see the shape of an animal or the shape of an object in the cloud. That's our brain playing tricks on us. That cloud is not really in the shape of anything, but we just want it. We don't like the randomness of cloud shapes in the sky. When we look up at the moon, we see the man in the moon. It looks like a face, but it doesn't really. That's just, the closest thing our brain can think of. That's the closest association we have to figure out what that image is that we are perceiving. So we tell ourselves, our brain tells us it's a face, but it's not. Not at all. Little things like that, man in the moon, seeing shapes in the clouds, not a big deal, right? But it can happen on a bigger level. So back when Hurricane Katrina hit, there was a group, and when I say they were affiliated with the church, I can't remember exactly. They were a pro-life organization, and they saw radar image of Hurricane Katrina, and their minds, and I don't know exactly how it went down, if it was like the whole group truly all saw the same thing independently, or if it was like one person saw it and then that influenced what the others saw. But they were convinced that there was an image of a fetus in the womb contained in that radar image. Random data, random imagery from a hurricane contained an image of a fetus in the womb. So therefore, it was obvious to them that Hurricane Katrina was punishment for the presence of abortion clinics. And you could see how when taken, if you take the next step from there, it could be a call to arms to do something about abortion clinics or do something to them. So this misperception of random data that our brains are so hungry for, we're good at creating it. We don't even think twice about it, and it can prompt us to action. Not a great thing to base our actions on, huh? We also have what's called memorable events error, right? So this one is not going to be that surprising. It might be surprising how it affects critical thinking, though. Memorable events error is our ability to vividly remember outstanding events, big, impactful events. And we know this, right? We know this happens, right? We know that, I can't tell you what the weather was like 3 weeks ago today, but I can tell you exactly what the weather was like, what the air felt like, what the sun felt like, what the sky and clouds looked like the morning of September 11th, 2001. I have vivid memories of that morning, but I can't tell you what the weather I can tell you what the weather was like yesterday. We remember details of memorable events. Now this is not the same as how time, can distort our memory. This is why we have memories of those events. Why did we remember the Challenger explosion in the first place, right? Because it was a memorable event. So our brain actually has this mechanism that filters out all of the mundane, everyday details of our lives. We don't want total recall of every single second of every single day we've ever lived. Our brains cannot handle that, right? Our long-term memory can't. We keep stuff like that in short-term memory for a little while. But when it comes to what makes it into our long-term memory, there's a mechanism. There's a filtering process. And we don't let all the little details, those don't get through to long-term memory. But little details on memorable days do get let in. That mechanism kind of shuts off, like there's an emotional response. It and those details make it into long-term memory. But sometimes that can mess with us. Surprise. One example of how memorable events error can affect us is, a lot of people are afraid to fly. And the reason they're afraid to fly is because they are under the impression they have a true belief that air flight is dangerous. And that there's too good of a chance that the plane might crash. Well, statistically speaking, but yet these same people, by the way, have no issues driving their car several times a day, every day. Driving a car, fine. Not so dangerous. Not as risky. Traveling by airplane, super dangerous, super risky, not going to do it. Even though We are 16 times more likely to be killed in an auto accident than in an airplane accident. But yet, aren't airplane crashes a bit of a memorable event? They don't happen very often. So when they do, there's a lot of media attention, is there not? So we hear about it more. We see the reports. We might even see some of the wreckage. We might, hear from any possible survivors, or if there were no survivors, we will hear from their family members, right? It's just, it becomes a memorable event. The reason it becomes a memorable event is because they are so rare that when they happen, we make a big deal about it. But because we make a big deal about it, it becomes a memorable event. Car accidents are happening all the time, every day. Those aren't getting attention. They aren't being turned into memorable events that stick back here in our long-term memory. So we don't think about the risks of driving a car, but because airplane crashes have become memorable events, those stick in our head more, and it makes us more anxious and nervous and fearful of air travel. But, statistically and truthfully speaking, we have way more chance of being in a car accident than we do of being in an airplane accident. Right? We also are prone to probability errors. We're awful with probabilities. We really are. But what a probability error is a misunderstanding the probability or chances of an event by a huge margin. So for instance, if you're in class with 22 other students, there's 23 students in class total, the probability of two people having the same birthday, month and date, not year necessarily, month and date, the probability of two people having the same birthday, 50%. There is a 50% chance that someone else in that room of 22 other students will have the same birth date as you. And that is not the percentage that most people guess. They actually think that it is like a 1 in a million, like maybe not million, but most people think that the odds are really, really low that 2 out of 23 people could have the same birthday. We think it's just, that's what are the odds? Actually, 50-50. Coin flip, actually, right? We're not good with probability. It makes us, we're so bad with probability that it makes us think that coincidences have paranormal causes. And I don't mean like ghostly causes, but just unnatural, supernatural. That there's no such thing as coincidence. It's the universe. It's whatever. And really, it's just that these things happening are just consistent with probability, right? But we're so bad with probability that we think there's no chance. This is just too crazy of a coincidence. It means something. Not really. Just probability. Just math. Right? Probability errors. It can create some problems. It can also, one form of probability error is gambler's error, right? So this is the false belief that previous events affect the probability in a random event. So what has happened before has an effect on the chances of something happening now. So we had a study where they took a bunch of gamblers, a bunch of people playing slots and, roulette and blackjack and things like that. And they had them voice their thoughts as they're gambling, to say their thoughts out loud. And like 70% of these vocalizations were based on gambler's error. So the participants were saying things like, all right, this machine hasn't hit in a while, so I know it's going to hit soon. Right? The past, it hasn't hit in a while, so that is influencing, it is affecting the probability that it's going to hit for me now. My lucky dealer, right? Here's my lucky dealer. I'm bound to win now. Today is my lucky day. I'm feeling good, right? Or it's my turn to win. So once people were confronted with these vocalized thoughts, the people who were there gambling but aren't necessarily problem gamblers, they were like, oh my God, I really said that? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, no. Like they got it. They could see that they were saying some really ridiculous things and that they had no control over the situation. There is no way to know when you're going to win and when you're going to lose, right? But the problem gamblers, they still fully believed in what they were saying, because the occasional wins that they would get would just reinforce what they had been saying out loud. All right. The machine is due, right? This machine hasn't hit yet. So I need to stick with it because it's going to hit for me. Sometimes the machine really does hit, but it's not because it was due. It's just that's what happens. Slot machines hit. And yeah, someone has to make it hit, so someone's going to get lucky. Right? But there's no rhyme or reason to it. There is no way to predict. And none of those beliefs, those rationalizations actually matter. But a person with a true gambling problem does not see it that way, and they fully believe in those vocalizations. But again, it's a perceptual and it's a cognitive error. We are awful with probabilities. And then you add in the possibility of forming addiction. It's not good. We also have in cognitive and perceptual errors, what we call self-serving biases. So we have the misperception that we are in control, the tendency to overestimate ourselves in comparison to others, and our tendency to exaggerate our strengths, minimize our weaknesses. So we're going to take a quick look at each of these. So our first self-serving bias is the misperception that we are in control. One example being, knew it was going to rain today. You know why? Because I didn't bring my umbrella. Like, people really think things like that. Choosing lottery numbers. A lot of people choose lottery numbers based on their lucky numbers, right? They have specific numbers that they're going to fill out every week, because those are the ones that are going to make sure that they have a winning ticket. Even though 80% of winning lottery tickets are numbers that are randomly generated. 80%. I mean, that's significant. 80% of winning lottery tickets are computer-generated numbers. I think that's how I'm going to go. My lucky numbers mean nothing to that machine, right? So, how many people are still using their lucky numbers to fill out lottery tickets? A lot. Superstitions make us feel like we are in control. I'm not wearing my lucky socks, so my team's gonna lose, right? It just makes us feel like we're in control, but we're not. And when we look at someone else's behavior, we can see these. It's harder to recognize it when it's our own behavior, when it's our own superstitions, right? And we may be empathetic, but we don't fully, we don't believe that someone wearing their lucky socks is going to make sure their team wins. We understand the need for superstitions. We understand. We even have a few of our own. It's all good, but we know it doesn't really affect whether one team wins or loses. But it's all right. You just go ahead and wear your socks. It's no big deal. And when it's us, we believe it. It's really weird how our brains work like that. Thinking that we are in control can lead to some pretty dire consequences. You know, it can, there's common sayings out there in the world, like you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. Or this new the law of attraction, where if you put positivity out into the world, you will attract positivity, right? It is making people think that they can have some semblance of control over their lives, right? So you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. I'm putting my mind to it and I am giving it my all and I am trying my hardest. And it's still not happening for me. It just creates this, it makes us more susceptible to turning inwards and saying, there must be something wrong with me. I'm not good enough, right? And same thing with, this law of attraction, like putting everything, whatever you want, put that out in the world and you'll get it back, right? Speak to the universe what you want and it will give it to you. Things like that. Like, but if that doesn't happen for us, if we fail, if then it's like we only have ourselves to blame. It leads to negative thinking, can it lead to serious self-esteem issues, depression, suicidal ideation. Like it can be bad to continually tell ourselves and tell each other that we have control, because for much of what happens in our lives, we don't. We just think we do, or we convince ourselves we do. But there's a lot going on out there, totally out of our control. A lot going on directly in our little circle. We have no control. We have control over us, ourselves. That's it. Right? We also have a tendency to overestimate ourselves in comparison to others. We will always be much better than we think other people are, basically. So for example, 70% of Americans are overweight. 90% of people surveyed agreed with that assessment. When they were told, research shows 70% of Americans are overweight, do you believe that statistic? Does that sound right to you? 90% of people are like, yeah, sounds right. But only 39% of those people considered themselves to be overweight. 90% of people agreed that 70% of people are overweight, but only 39% of them think that they themselves are overweight. Right? What about with grades? When we do well on a test, we take credit for it. We studied hard, we're smart, we did the work, we take credit for our own success. When we do poorly, we push the blame on something else. The test wasn't fair. The teacher didn't cover the material effectively. Someone was tapping their pencil and it was distracting me. I didn't get a good night's sleep, which actually is somewhat valid. But just we blame it on everything else except us. Except, we don't take responsibility for the role we ourselves played in how we performed on that test, right? Workplace behavior. Survey showed that 89% of office employees said that they have experienced backstabbing, rudeness, and instability in the workplace. 89% of people surveyed said they have had those issues with their coworkers in the workplace. But 99% of those same people said that they were never rude or the cause of conflict. It was never because of them. So apparently there's like, I don't even 1% of people in the workplace who are responsible for 89% for that whole whole bit of workplace rudeness. So clearly, we are quick to admit that there are problems. We are quick to admit that, a wide variety of people are at fault. But not us, not me. Not me. Something to be aware of. All right. We also have a tendency to exaggerate our strengths and minimize our weaknesses, which goes right along with, overestimating ourselves, right? Down and minimizing others. We want to believe that we possess the traits and abilities that are important in life, that are going to increase our sense of self-worth. Group of boys, very intellectually gifted boys, they thought that they had all done really poorly in one of their academic classes, right? And these boys, again, very gifted boys, they've probably grown up valuing academics and being told how smart they are, right? How good they are at school. It's part of their identity. It's part of their self-worth. They've been made to feel really good about that. And then they take a class and they are under the impression that they've all done really bad, right? Not something they're used to. It starts chipping away at their self-identity because they're supposed to be the gifted ones. They're supposed to be the ones that are good at school, get the good grades always, and that's super important and it's something to be proud of, et cetera, et cetera. So when they feel like they have all failed this class, what do? They start talking about how school really isn't all that important. Academics isn't everything. Really what, we really need to talk about how important athletics and sports are, right? Or music, theater, things like that, pursuing other interests. Like that's what's most important. That's that's what we should all be striving for. And maybe they'll look at their own, like I've been taking piano lessons for years and I'm so good at it. Or I've been on the soccer team for, this many years. Like they will just suddenly pretend like the thing that mattered most for so long is irrelevant and really not all that important. And they will instead focus on other things that they can then use to boost themselves. Instead of having to deal with not doing so well in the thing that they normally focus on and enjoy. So weird like that. It's crazy, right? So another error in thinking is what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is when we have exaggerated or distorted expectations of a situation, and our actions, because of those expectations, we behave a certain way. And in behaving a certain way, we cause other things to happen that then actually brings about the expected event. So so Great Depression. There were rumors of an impending bank failure during the Great Depression. Actually, at the time, the banks were okay, right? There were rumors of the banks failing, which led to mass panic. People rushed to take their money out of the banks before it all crashed. But them taking their money out of the banks all at once like that mass panic caused the banks to crash, right? We have another example here, kind of a real life example as well. We have a literature professor. They have a star athlete come into their class. Literature professor takes one look at this athlete and is like, great. Okay, well, whatever. As long as he passes the class, I guess. I'm sure that's all he's really here for. He's probably heard it's an easy class. I can't imagine he's actually interested in literature. He's probably going to be lost most of the time. Not really going to be understanding what we're talking about. I'll do the best I can, but I'm not going to hold the rest of the class up. I'm sure all he really wants to do is just pass. So hopefully he can at least do that. So as a result, the professor kind of ignores the student athlete most of the term, right? Doesn't call on them, doesn't really engage them, sees the student kind of sitting there a lot of the times with this far off look on their face. They just think, yeah, they're daydreaming, they're thinking about next week's game, whatever. What's actually happening, though, is that athlete took the literature class because they actually are interested in literature. They used to write for the school newspaper. They used to write poetry. They were actually super excited about this class, intended to do well. But because of how the professor was treating them, the student was like, why bother? Like, I don't feel welcome. I don't feel valued. I don't feel like this teacher wants to give me the time of day. They're not interested in anything I have to say or contribute to this class, so screw it, right? Why? So the student ends up passing the class. Maybe not with a D, maybe just with a C, but still the grade did not show that the student had the ability to excel at it. It's just a passing grade, which then simply reaffirms what the professor thought in the first place. Kid's just gonna come in and do the bare minimum just to pass. Fine, whatever. Her belief and her reaction, her behaviors were based on false assumptions, but led to exactly what the false assumption predicted. So we take it as proof, but it's really a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not, she wasn't right, and it's almost a coincidence that what she thought was going to happen actually ended up happening. It's unfortunate that she thinks it happened for the reason she thinks it happened. She doesn't understand that it happened for an entirely different reason, and that she is partly to blame for that. I don't want to say she's fully to blame, because the student could have spoken up as well and said, hey, I'd really like to stop by your office during office hours and talk about, maybe even if they're not going to address the situation directly, be like, I'd love to talk to you about this thing we've read or this thing we talked about. And then at least the teacher would get a little glimpse of, oh, hey. So the student could have done something as well. I won't put it 100% on the professor, but it's like majority on the professor, almost all. So we also have what's called social errors and biases that can affect critical thinking. Right? So, one second. All right. So, and it really shouldn't come as any surprise that our social norms and cultural expectations wield a lot of power in terms of how we view the world. But they can be barriers to critical thinking. So we have the one of us versus one of them error, social expectations and stereotyping, group pressure and conformity, and group diffusion of responsibility. So our one of us versus one of them error, I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone. I think we all know what this means. We have an innate urge. It's just in something about humans where we just automatically want to view the world as what we know and what we're familiar with, what we're comfortable with. That's the us versus them. What we don't know, what we don't understand, what we're not familiar with, what is different from us, right? Us and them. And this is literally how our world functions, is us versus them, for better or worse. This is, we have these qualifiers that we use. We never say, something like a gay judge, female doctor, or a Down syndrome child. We never say straight judge, male doctor, able-bodied child. We differentiate us, that what is like me, what is different from me. We know that it's the cause of so many culture conflicts, ethnic conflicts. We see it in politics all the time. Gosh, it used to just be like every 4 years, but now with how contentious politics are, it's literally almost non-stop, because it's like once one election cycle is over, they are ramping up for the next one, because now people are paying attention to more than just the presidential election every 4 years. So, oh my goodness, us versus them. Our politics has us. It's bad. And it's such an error in thinking. It is such a hindrance to critical thinking skills. We have to first realize that it's happening and realize that we are all guilty of it in some way. We need to be aware of it, we need to look for it, and we need to come up with ways of being more inclusive. How can we widen our us circle, right? How can we find more common ground with those who we have up until now put over in the them category? It has to be done. Social expectations are quite powerful as well. They can even lead to collective delusions like the Salem witch trials. It's even in like police interrogation, right? And I don't mean profile. That's something totally different, like stereotype. What I mean with interrogations and societal expectations is could go either way. Let's say you have a kid who is accused of killing one of their parents, killing their mother, right? And we know that the mother was super abusive. Just put this kid through hell. So we go into that interrogation, and our societal expectation tells us that kids from violent homes become violent themselves. Kids who experience violence in their childhood become violent. That's actually not true. It's actually children who witness violence in their home, witness it, become violent. That's the norm. But our societal expectation says, well, look at what this kid had to deal with. Of course, they're going to be violent. Of course, he killed his mother. The interrogation is going to do whatever, going to take a turn. It's going to be conducted in a way to get the results that the officers and society at large expects. And then, of course, we have stereotyping. We know how societal expectations will lead to stereotyping. We also have group pressure and conformity. We know what this is like in high school, but even as adults, group pressure can influence individual members, to take positions that they would never support by themselves. People will even deny evidence right in front of their face if it means they can still stick with the group. I'll show you a slide here. We'll go ahead and go to it. So the Ash experiment, right? So in Ash's experiment, he had 6 control subjects, right? So basically 6 control subjects and then a variety of student volunteers who were the subjects of the experiment, right? So the 6 control subjects, they were told, we're going to ask the students to look here at this line, the long purple line by itself, and then we're going to have them look at these other three lines, A, B, and C, and we're going to ask them which line is the same length as exhibit 1. Is it A, B, or C? Well, obviously it's A. Everybody knows it's A, right? But we want you to say B or C, right? Actually, we want you all to say B. They get in there, right? And these 6 test subjects are like older students, more experienced students, right? So they have a little bit of authority, perhaps. So they all give the wrong answer. They all say, "Oh yeah, line B is the same length." And these student subjects, these student volunteers that were the ones being observed, you could tell like in the beginning, like the first older student, first veteran student would give the wrong answer. And the young student would be like, "What?" And then the next older student would give the same wrong answer. And again, our young students like, "What? Is this for real? What?" And it just keeps going down the line. And by the time it gets to the younger student, they give the wrong answer too. They say B, even though they know it's A. Everybody knows it's A. But because the group pressure, conformity, 75% gave the same wrong answer. 75% also said B, even though they knew it was A. So we need to develop some strategies for this, right? It's it's really no good, this pressure to conform. And actually, we have this idea that consensus is the way to go, right? So if a decision is reached because the majority agrees to it, then we have done it the right way. We've done it the fair way, and it's, and clearly the solution we have come up with is the best one possible. That is not necessarily the case when you realize how susceptible we are to group pressure and conformity. It is easy to sway people in a group, even adults. Even as adults, when we know that, certain people are voting one way, we can have a difficult time voting against that. And we will even end up voting for that, even though it's not what we really believe or what we really felt was the right thing to do. So anytime we hear about a group coming to a decision, we need to take a step back and decide and see if we can figure out, was it the consensus, and was it the right thing to do? Was it the right solution? We should not just assume that the majority is correct, right? We're not looking to find out, did they sway someone? Who's the person who voted against for conscience? No, that's not what we mean. We just mean like the group decided this is the best solution to our problem. So this is what we should do. And you got to take a step back and be like, okay, that's great that the majority agreed on this plan of action, but I'm not going to just automatically assume that you're correct. I'm not going to assume that that it's correct just because the majority of you agree to it, because I know, due to perceptual and cognitive errors, that some of those you might have gotten to a majority even though half of them actually disagreed. They're just too afraid to go against and be a nonconformist. We also have the diffusion of responsibility error. This is when we walk past a homeless person in the street and do nothing because we think it's not our problem. This is when, you hear someone calling for help, or you see someone being attacked, and you don't step in and do something. Especially now, here's the thing, here's the difference. we will possibly give money to a homeless person. We will possibly step in and try to help someone being attacked if there aren't a lot of people around. But once we hit a critical size, a critical mass of people, we won't do anything. We will walk right past that homeless person. We will ignore the fight happening, the attack happening. We will ignore the hit and run, right? Because there's so many people there, the responsibility diffuses. It's like, it's not my problem. If there's, why do I have to be the one? Why is it my responsibility to go help? Why is it my responsibility to make sure this person is okay? Why is it my responsibility to call 911? Why is it my responsibility to give change to this homeless person? Why? So while we may be likely to be helpful in those same situations when there are very few people around, most of us are very slow to react and be helpful if there's a large group, and it's called diffusion of responsibility. So we know that knowledge is a crucial component of effective critical thinking. We know that we have to recognize that, that knowledge comes from reason, it comes from experience, and that they are both subject to distortion. That we cannot count on, we really have to be careful what we take at face value. And we need to be aware of our limitations. We need to be aware of cognitive and perceptual errors and the limitations of knowledge and social errors and biases. And we need to recognize them in ourselves and make sure that we are looking for them in others as we try to gather information and form points of view on things. Our minds, as brilliant as they are, man, sometimes they make it hard for us to be steadfast critical thinkers. It's like we have a lot to work against in a lot of ways. So we need to always be aware of those things and make sure that we are accounting for them, right? The last thing in chapter 4 was our critical thinking issue, which is on evaluating evidence for the existence of UFOs. We are not covering this one in this week's critical thinking issue assignment. We're going to be covering the one from chapter 5 instead. So, but I encourage you to read those articles on critical thinking issue for UFOs and kind of, thinking about our perceptual errors and our cognitive errors. Think about how we should evaluate evidence for the existence of UFOs, or what we should think about the evidence that people already claim is there to support the existence of UFOs. All right, but yes, read that if you want. Definitely reach out if you have any questions, though, about anything else from chapter 4 that we covered. Otherwise, you're free to go ahead and move on.